Joining us now, political consultant Dan Gerstein. He was communications director for Connecticut Senator Joseph Lieberman and helped run his 2004 presidential campaign and his 2006 Senate campaign. And Bloomberg's Peter Cook also joining us here in studio. Welcome to you all. And Dan, I know you were listening in with us to Senator Dodd's remarks. Just your first reaction.
Well, it's a sad day. You know, I grew up with Senator Dodd as my senator, then went to Washington, worked for Senator Lieberman, and worked very closely with Senator Dodd and his staff. And, you know, he was a fixture in Connecticut politics for a long time. And for people who worked in politics, he was a Paul's Paul. I mean, he was a total professional, was a great legislator. And I think one part of his legacy that I think will come out is he, like Senator Kennedy, came into the school of working on a bipartisan basis to try and get things done, and had a long record of legislative accomplishment because he was willing to work with Republicans.
And Dan, let me ask you something, because the conversation during the morning, I guess for most political pundits, had been that in his re-election bid, it seems early polls suggest that he would be down to his Republican challenger by as much as double digits. But he did say something that gave me pause earlier today. 2009 was a horrible year for him. He lost his sister to cancer. He lost his very good friend Ted Kennedy to cancer. He battled prostate cancer himself. Is it just entirely possible that this might not have anything to do with politics and everything to do with the fact that he might be emotionally and physically exhausted?
I would say it's all of the above. I don't think you can rule out his political standing because he was likely facing a very, very difficult re-election, and I think he probably was going to lose. At the same time, he might have been willing to fight in a different context if all these other things that had happened, and not if he didn't have the strain of losing one of his best friends, losing a sister, fighting cancer, and being involved in these big legislative lifts. That's a lot. That's a lot. So I can understand very much why he wouldn't necessarily want to take on that fight this year.
One of the things I thought was interesting in this speech, he said that his positions and his actions cause questions of his competence. We know there was the issue with the Countrywide Financial, him getting the mortgage. He says he didn't realize he got a discount from them. But, you know, does it raise the issue that the broader public still has a lot of questions about how the government handled the overall bailout for the financial system after the crisis?
Absolutely. And I would go a step further, and I never thought I'd be saying this about Chris Dodd, but I think it wasn't so much about his competence, about his character. A lot of people in Connecticut had questions about his judgment and whether he was the honest guy that they always thought he was. And I think that really eroded his political standing. I would say, though, that Chris Dodd is really the first victim of the anti-bailout backlash in American politics on a national level. And I think you're going to see more and more members of Congress facing this that have connections to Wall Street, that have seen it being part of this conspiracy among the elites to rig the system. That's going to be a potent force in this campaign.
And we want to invite Peter Cook now. I believe you have a question too, Peter.
Well, I just want to weigh in on one thing there, and that Dan's right, that he may be the first casualty of bailout politics, but he also, as he just pointed out, may get the last word with regard to that. He's going to be able to devote his time now to financial regulatory reform. We heard other colleagues in the Senate say he's been somewhat distracted by his re-election chances, the fight he faces in Connecticut. Now, Senator Dodd can devote his full time and attention to financial regulatory reform, and I've heard a lot of folks in D.C. and here on Wall Street today suggest that they now believe that that will regain new momentum, given the fact that he's no longer distracted by these other issues.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Peter. And I will go a step further and say that this is probably very good news for Wall Street, because a lot of the political pressure that would have been on Senator Dodd to show his independence and to actually, you know, be tough on Wall Street is going to get removed, or at least mitigated to some extent, by him not running for a re-election. So I think he'll be in a better position to make policy based on sort of what he thinks is the best balance to deal with both, you know, the casino economy in Wall Street, but also in making sure that our banking system works and that the, you know, fluidity and liquidity is there.
And Peter, if I might ask you a question, because you've been following this whole regulatory reform push, what's going to be the outcome now with Senator Dodd no longer chairing the banking committee?
Well, he's going to keep the chairmanship, of course, through the end of 2010. And then, of course, the first question is, Mark, do Democrats hold on to control of the U.S. Senate? Most odds makers would say they stand a good chance of doing that. If that's the case, as Lizzie O'Leary pointed out earlier, the seniority process, and Dan can speak to this, it's Byzantine but very important in Congress seniority. Tim Johnson, the South Dakota Democrat, he's next in line for this committee, but he did suffer a brain hemorrhage 2 years ago. There have been questions about his capacity to handle handle this job. His office has maintained that he's perfectly capable of handling this job. You're going to hear other names mentioned. Jack Reed of Rhode Island's name has come up a lot, very respected on the Hill and a big close ally of President Obama's. You're also going to hear, I know some people perhaps here in New York suggest that Chuck Schumer, he might be a good fit for this position, and it might be a position he'd like.
And Dan, we have about 30 seconds left. The Attorney General of Connecticut, Mr. Blumenthal, announcing that he is going to, or at least will later today officially announce he's going to seek that Senate seat. Is he automatically in the lead here?
Yes, he's going to be a very strong favorite for a number of reasons. He has strong statewide recognition. He has some of the highest favorabilities in the state. And a lot of the anger that was there surrounding Senator Dodd is going to dissipate a little bit because, A, Blumenthal doesn't have the ties to Washington that Dodd does, and more importantly, he has a record of taking on Wall Street.
And a tough challenge from Linda McMahon?
I think in this case, you never know what's going to happen in that Republican primary. But to be honest with you, I don't think the Republican challenger is going to matter as much in this race as it did against Senator Dodd.
Dan Gerstein, political consultant for Senator Joe Lieberman of Connecticut, and our Peter Cook.